So we were listening to the statements of the presidential candidate Rixi Moncada, who arrived here in the very early hours of the opening of the polls to exercise her right to vote in these general elections on Sunday, November 30th, a general election that kick-started at 7 p.m. local time in Honduras by the National Electoral Authorities. And as the presidential candidate announced yesterday in a presser, she will be in the very early hours at her designated voting center in the neighborhood where she has lived for over 30 years in the colony Centro America Este, in the school that also carries the same name. The presidential candidate is waiting to go to exercise her right to vote. She was offering statements to the press before doing so, where she referred to the main topics to come into the elections and call on the people, of course, to go out and vote and to continue trusting the Refoundation project. And she was calling on the people to not let anyone from abroad or anyone decide their future, but call on the people to decide for themselves and to do so through the democratic vote in this Sunday's general elections. We have to recall that not only this election not only is to elect the next president for the next 4 years of the country, but the citizens of Honduras will be electing 128 deputies of the National Congress, as well as 20 deputies of the Central American Parliament and 298 municipal mayors, with an over 6.6 million Hondurans are called to participate in this electoral day. We're seeing the presidential candidate for the Libre Party, Rixi Moncada, preparing to enter the polling station where she is when she is enlisted to carry out her civic duty and exercise her right to vote. Voting in Honduras is not compulsory, and everyone over 18 years of age is allowed to exercise their right to vote. The presidential candidate, Rixi Moncada, in her statements here, previous to the moment of her casting her ballot, she was also once more denouncing the interfering actions coming from the United States, as we saw in the last couple of days, coming straight from the presidency of that North American nation, where President Donald Trump said that he would make conditional all kind of international cooperation and aid to Honduras on the fact that the candidate that he supports wins the election, which is Sfura, with something that is completely illegal in international law, as no foreign power is allowed to interfere in an electoral process in a foreign country, as stipulated in the UN Charter, in the United Nations Charter. The presidential candidate also referred to the other plot that has been discovered throughout these days during the campaign period, which was the leaking of audio recordings that link the other presidential candidate with the authorities of the National Electoral Council, referring to the fact that they would use the early transmission system, what they refer in Honduras as TREP, which is the early transmission system of the results that is done electronically, digitally. And as the presidential candidate was saying, over 10 private companies are the ones in charge of this system. And referring on that topic, the presidential candidate said that they would not recognize, they would not acknowledge the results coming from that early transmission system, as it has been clear and evident that there is a plot to try to thwart the electoral will, the popular will of the Honduran people. And what she will recognize, she said, is the will of the people, which will be reflected in the acts of every voting center, which will be transmitted. And for that purpose, she called on the people to be vigilant and to protect the vote and to make sure that all the vote counting and all that process and the drafting of the voting acts are done in accordance to what is stipulated in law. We are now seeing the presidential candidate for the Libre Party, Rixi Moncada, going through the different stages of the voting process. She is now going through the biometric part of the identification of her identity, and where she's gonna, where the system acknowledges that she is herself, that she is Rixi Moncada, is part of the process to make sure that all the people that vote are part of the electoral roll. As we are seeing, she's going through that electronic process and the identification, that she's showing that her identity information as registered in the biometric system. And from that moment on, she will carry out with her ID and receive the different voting cards, the papers, to move forward and exercise her vote. Let her introduce that electoral paper inside the ballot boxes, which of course are sealed and will continue to be sealed until the closing of the polls and the moment that the vote counting begins. A moment that the presidential candidates has called on everyone to be sure that it's done correctly, and the results of those transmission of those acts are the one that herself and her party will recognize following all the different plots that have marked this presidential campaign, this electoral campaign in Honduras general elections, which have been denounced with proofs. We're referring to the audio leaks the audios that were leaked, that were definitely proof of the intention to try to hijack that early transmission system, to try to deceive the Honduran people and to be providing results which are not in accordance with what the people really took on, what the people really decided for at the voting tables. So, as we were saying, we are live in Honduras. Presidential candidate for the Libre Party, Rixi Moncada, is continuing with her different checks to carry out her votes, and in these Sunday general elections, she was offering statements, as we were saying before, casting her ballot. She also referred to the recent decision of President Donald Trump as part of its acts of interference in the Honduran electoral process, on the pardon of the former president that was sentenced to 45 years in prison for drug trafficking, the president that was in power from 2017 to 2021, the president that lost in 2021 the elections, and that was charged with over government officials, mayors, politicians, for drug trafficking in a New York court. That's something that she highlights, that it's not them saying that they are drug traffickers and criminals. They have been convicted, tried, and sentenced by a New York court with all the evidence that is there for everyone to see, and that even if Donald Trump pardons